So we have a lot to talk about tonight, but let's start with these first couple of takeaways here. Was this an insurrection? And if there is a ban in the Constitution on insurrectionists holding office, but you can't enforce it by preventing ineligible candidates from running for office, then how exactly does that ban get enforced? Ari Melber, you were in the room today when it happened. You were there for the arguments. First of all, let me ask you to critique my summary. Do you think it's fair to pull out those points as some of the pillars on which this argument was held up? I
think it's very fair, and it's the first time we've seen the aspects of the insurrection discussed by the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the argument about, on the point of insurrection, I felt like I was going to hear a lot today about what counts as an insurrection. That snark from Justice Jackson was priceless. But we didn't hear a lot of substantive other discussion about what it takes to call something an insurrection. Does that tell us something important about where the justices see their sort of the edge of their job description here in terms of what they ought to be considering?
Yes, it tells us a lot, and it also speaks to how bipartisan this was if you go by the different justices appointed by different parties. Based on the questioning, which is all we have to go on, I would give you 8 or 9 votes likely against the Colorado Trump ballot ban. And that's not because all 8 or 9 of those people are soft on insurrection. It's because of the things you raised and that we heard some in the questioning about. And so I'll give you a detailed legal answer to that if you want, but I'll start with something very simple, which is it was clear by the end of the argument that most of these people just didn't want to go near ballot bans. The reasoning came second. It was almost more honest than usual, how much everyone was like, we don't want to do this. We're not going to co-sign this. And then let's find
How do we get out?
How do we get out? And so I would liken it to if anyone's ever had a destination wedding invite that you're not excited about, like these people you used to know better from a while back, and it's in Antarctica. And you're first like, look, let me tell you straight up, that's far away. I heard it's cold weather. Also, I think it's really expensive tickets, right? You're like brainstorming why you can't go.
I have a sore back.
Yes, I have a energy. How close are we? Now, any of those things might also be true. And someone then might come to you and say, oh, there's a super sale because not a lot of people want to go to Antarctica, super cheap tickets. And you're like, yeah, but it wasn't just the ticket. Right. There are other reasons. And that's what it felt like to me. And so if you're looking for this to be the case that stops Trump, I would tell you maybe you find it to be bad news. Not you, I mean, the viewer or anyone listening, thinking as a citizen. But if you're thinking, does the court still work on a nonpartisan basis? In some ways, we saw that answered with how much it was like that. And so to then jump in briefly to your legal question. Yeah. The big thing was, even if it is an insurrection, or even if this is something that you should be kicked off the ballot for, who decides that? Is it just a random Secretary of State in one state? And we have a lot of different types of ways we pick Secretaries of State, and they vary in partisanship. Is it judges in this state? And as Chief Roberts put it, at one point being as kind of blunt as he could, he wasn't talking law or text. He just said, wait, but if we did allow this, then other states would punch back. If we give them the power and say any state can do this, then they're all going to be knocking each other off the ballot. Now, let me tell you, Rachel.
Good answer to that.
Go ahead.
There's a good, the Justice Roberts raised that issue. Another justice raised that issue as well. Good answers to that issue, though, from the lawyers who are representing the Colorado voters.
I think Colorado had a very substantive answer, which is there was an insurrection and it was televised. And there's only one person who called those people to town. And that this idea of insurrections popping up everywhere is not factually true. And the court's concern about that, which I think includes Democratic appointees. I think Justice Jackson, who's a Biden appointee, who's well-versed on how they tried to stop then-President-elect Biden from coming to office, I don't think she's minimizing the insurrection. I think her point was, yes, but we're still going to run into who resolves that. In other words, you could be factually right, but still have an arms race across the states, and that is a concern for the court. And so this became, if I was going to bottom line it legally, this became much more of a debate about the remedy. Should this be dealt with in some other part of government than the problem? The problem is huge.
And let me stick with you on that for a second, though, Ari, because and we're going to talk in more detail about the sort of parade of horrors. What if a state can take a person off the ballot? What would that mean? What would the other states do? There would be retaliation. There would be unreasonable actions taken by other states to take other people off the ballot. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But on this issue of whether or not the states do this or somebody else does, we also got a parade of horrors today in that courtroom about what happens if the states don't do it. Because if there is a ban on insurrection in the Constitution and it can't be enforced by the states, then it has to be enforced by Congress, which is inviting another January 6th disaster. That's the rejoinder, right? It's one way or the other. You may not like the states doing it, but if they don't do it, the Congress is going to have to do it, and that's going to be a disaster, too. We've seen that before.
Yeah, now to sound like a lawyer, I think that is a non-frivolous point. It is a legitimate...
Very much.
No, it's a legitimate point. And so what we saw in the oral argument was, you're offering chaos, I see you with chaos.
Yes.
That these now...
If you do, damn if you don't.
And there's a saying in the law about constitutional hardball. Well, this is beyond hardball. This is sort of constitutional flagrant fouls or constitutional violence or whatever you want to call it. Trump and his fans and his now convicted sedition fans, right? He wasn't convicted of sedition or charged with it. He awaits trial for something else. But his fans, the people he summoned, many of them have now been convicted of sedition. They have now sparked this back and forth. And we're going to hear, as you mentioned, from the lawyer later tonight, who was arguing that having gone down this road, there need to be strong remedies pushing back. Having said that, though, I think that the justices, including the Democratic appointees, basically said, yes, but not at the state level.
Right.
Figure out some other bar.
Right.